I call Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it is my pleasure to take a short call in the third reading of this bill. And Mr Speaker, it was comforting to hear the Minister just say that this is one thing that the government is going to do to combat climate change, because while Labor is supporting this legislation, we do look forward to a suite of measures that are going to meaningfully address New Zealand's emission reductions and how it is that we're going to meet the targets that we've set ourselves, especially when we consider that we are going to have to get more ambitious. One of the features of the Paris Agreement is that ambition is built into it, and the ability to ratchet up each country's contribution will increase each meeting on meeting. So at the moment, New Zealand's rather timid contribution of 11% on 1990 level reductions from 2021 onwards is something that we're going to have to get more ambitious about. We are going to have to front up to the international community, and we are importantly going to have to show that we are meeting our targets. And Mr Speaker, we are currently not meeting our targets. We are not on the kind of transition pathway to a low carbon economy where we can or will meet our targets. And Mr Speaker, this piece of legislation, while it's something we welcome, let's bear in mind 0.07 reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions from this piece of legislation. That is what the Ministry for the Environment has calculated. So let's get real about what this legislation does and doesn't do. It's a good thing, it needed to happen, but make no mistake, this is not a plan to limit climate change. So when the Minister says this is oh but one thing, we look forward in the coming days and weeks to hearing the Minister roll out her comprehensive plan for how it is that New Zealand is going to reduce our emissions. We would welcome seeing a real commitment to carbon budgeting, but the fact that the National Government voted against aligning our targets and our emissions trading scheme just here tonight in the House doesn't give me great faith. But Mr Speaker, most other countries set carbon budgets. If we think about it as a household, if we want to save money, what do most people do? They set a budget, they write down, they make a commitment, and that's how they meet it. New Zealand doesn't do it, and guess what? It fails to meet its targets too. It's no great surprise, and it is just something that we do have to address, and we have to address fast. In the committee stages of this speech, of this legislation, I thought the Minister, in one of her responses, made a very telling contribution. One of those, and it is within the regulatory impact statement, that the reason for the long phase-in period of this through to 2019 is to protect dairy. And that's to protect dairy and its industrial gases, not its agricultural gases. That it is still being protected in terms of agricultural emissions, but in terms of its industrial usage, that what we cannot do is address our greenhouse gas emissions while we continue to favour one sector and subsidise that through other productive areas of our economy. Our economy is out of kilter because this government has not used the levers that the emissions trading scheme gave it to transform our economy, to diversify our economy, to add more value, to move to the kind of 21st century economy that New Zealand is going to need to survive in the world, Mr Speaker. And it is a trick that has been missed, and it is a trick that this government is continuing to miss. To listen to the government speakers through the course of this debate tonight just shows how out of step the government members are when it comes to the issue of climate change. In other countries, politicians are realising the opportunity that transitioning to low-carbon economies give us, the opportunities for us to create higher-value economies with better paying and more secure jobs. And that's the kind of vision that we in Labor have for New Zealand, and climate offers that opportunity. At the Paris climate talks, one of the standout side events that happens was the international business community getting together and saying governments were not doing enough. Governments were pushing, business was pushing governments to do more. And so we have here the business community in New Zealand realising that more needs to be done. But the government is out of step with that business. Businesses realise the threat that inaction on climate change posed to New Zealand. It poses the fiscal risk of New Zealand thinking it can just buy its way out by buying credits forevermore, and I know that's not something that Grant Robertson looks forward to. Business also recognises the real reputational risk of New Zealand failing to meet its climate change targets. New Zealand simply cannot continue to trade on some kind of clean green image and turn up to climate conference after climate conference and earn itself Fossil of the Day awards, which, make no mistake, New Zealand excelled in Paris. This is not the kind of image that we want for New Zealand on the global stage. We want New Zealand to be seen as somewhere where we are doing the right thing and we are not an international laggard. The legislation we have today and tonight in front of us is an important start, but it cannot be a cherry-picked part of the emissions trading scheme review. The Minister, when she was in the chair, admitted that the ETS was broken, that the ETS was so broken that it allowed something like the hot air credits to come into play. We're not putting the ultimate legislative protection around that in terms of a price floor to sit alongside a price ceiling. But we have to have a commitment to an ETS to be a mechanism that puts a real meaningful price on carbon that will work as a lever in our economy to move us onto a low carbon transitional pathway. Because we do not have that at the moment, Mr. Speaker. We cannot simply continue as business as usual, and we have to see the opportunities that are contained in that transition for us. Labor supports this bill, and we would equally support more measures from the government to finally start addressing New Zealand's rising greenhouse gas emissions.